Hello, so today we're going to be going over positioning in TFT SET 13. So here I'm going to give you examples as well as unit explanations of how to get the most out of different boards based on the positioning that you have. I'm going to try and make it interactive, so I'm going to be drawing on boards and putting units in and out to try and make it as interesting as possible. But basically this is going to be a general guide that should give you a good idea, especially if you're a beginner player, on where to put units on the different hex grid that you have in TFT. So, before we get much further, please make sure to like and subscribe. Many of you are not subscribed to my channel. I would say I think 90% of you aren't subscribed, but there's a huge majority of the viewers that I have are returning viewers actually. So please make sure if you watch my videos and you watch one or two of them and you do like my content, it does help me out to reach my subscriber goals and do stuff like that. We're going to have a giveaway at 5,000 subs for some coupons for my upcoming art store. And then later at 10,000 subs, we're going to have another RP giveaway. So that's what's coming up in the future. So it does help out me as well as maybe in your best interest, maybe not, but if you do like my content, it would help out to subscribe. Now let's talk about positioning. Why does positioning matter? So positioning is very slept upon, but it often affects the outcome of the fight. There's many times where you can have a slightly weaker board or a slightly stronger board, and when the boards are very close in strength, positioning is one of the ways that can differentiate who becomes the actual winner in the fight. You want to make sure that you're always trying to get the most out of how you place your units, because that is another way of optimizing the board that is not just knowing the strongest units and knowing the items on the units. Actually placing the units on the board can have a dramatic outcome, and it can actually affect you at all stages of the game, because you can save HP at all stages of the game. If you have good positioning in stage 2, you can save HP whether you're winning or you're losing. In stage 3, you can save HP whether you're winning or you're losing. You can, at the whole game, every single fight that you have, if you can just get one more unit kill, that can either be the difference between winning the fight, or it can be the difference between not losing the fight as hard. And when we're talking about positioning, that's very important. It's a very underutilized way that can dramatically affect placements. A lot of times when people ask me, like, I'm not that good, like, I don't think I'm that great of a player. I'm master, that's my rank. I don't think it's like, a hallmark, like I'm not in the pantheon of gods of TFT by any means. But a lot of times people ask me for advice, especially if they're an emerald or diamond. It's like, how did you get to masters? How do you get to masters? One big thing that you can do is, like, whether you're starting out the game beginner or if you're like trying to find ways to optimize, basically positioning every single fight in the best way possible a lot of times can save you HP over the course of the game, and that can give you that 4th instead of a 5th. That can give you that 2nd instead of a 3rd. It can dramatically affect how much your LP is gaining, because you basically just do those small increments that can add up over time. If you lose by 1 less unit every single fight by actually actively thinking about your positioning, by the end of the game, you're going to have 20 extra HP. It adds up really fast, and it adds up quite a bit. Sometimes it feels like it doesn't matter, but you should always take it into account, especially if you're trying to optimize your boards, or if you're just like a beginner player and you're trying to think of something new that you want to learn. Maybe you think that you have a good grasp on econ, you like the certain augments and comps, and you think that you're good in all of those regards, then you should start looking at positioning. So let's go through general positioning. So this is like backline, frontline ideas. So here I just made a simple board. This is just a Heimer Sentinel board. I'm going to try and pick some general boards just for these early examples, and then we're going to go deep into like the actual units and what the units kind of want, or how they want to work, especially like the 4 and 5 costs. But in typical TFT fashion, you usually have a front line that is composed of tanks. So this is the front line that I have that is made of a bunch of sentinels in this case. And then you have a back line that does damage. In this case, I have a Heimer Jace dual carry. This is like a typical 6 sentinel 4 academy board that you can fit it on level 9. Whenever you're making your board, a lot of times you're putting your frontline units in the front line. You can see them by hovering over them. Usually if they have a short range, so here right underneath magic tank, you'll see like a little arrow that shows the effective range of the unit. If they have a 1 range, usually there's somebody that needs to be placed in the front line. When you're in the front line, you are the first brunt of force that is accepting damage, basically. So for example, these traits, that sentinel, it gives you armor, so it's supposed to make them tankier, and these tanks are going to be accepting damage from the enemy team, and their job is just to live long enough to have your backline carries do damage. In this case, the backline carries, for example, Heimer has a range of 4, Jace has a range of, he should have a range of 4 if he's backline, as well as a range of 4. A lot of times they have an increased range. And the idea is that the Heimer is going to be able to hit the enemy team without taking damage himself. That's the idea. This is basic TFT at the most rudimentary level in terms of positioning. Now, If your opponent, let's just take your opponent and let's just make them a board. So here I'm just gonna go bruisers, just so they're different units. That's the only reason why I'm doing this. So I'm gonna put some bruisers on the opponent side. That's another frontline trait that you can have. And then I'm gonna put a backline carry. I'm just gonna pick a random backline carry here. I'm gonna put Zoe, for example, right? So the basic way of forming in TFT, the basic thing that usually you do when you first start the game is you usually have to itemize 3 items on 1 carry. I have a video on carry stacking and itemizations if you want to know why you always itemize 1 unit first. But basically you'll have 1 main tank and you'll have 1 main backline carry. And then you'll put 3 items on both of them. So here I'm just going to put the 3 items just so it's a little bit easier to see. So let's go here, and I'm looking for some sort of AP item. I'll just put Jewel Gauntlet. I can't find another one. And then I'll put some random tank items here. These aren't the best items, by the way. I have guides where I talk about itemizations of the actual units, but I just want to split up just so for visual purposes you guys can see who the tank is that I'm talking about. A lot of times in TFT, the safest place to put your carry is in the corner. Why is that? Because as units die, so I'm just going to start picking them off, right? As these units die, right, you usually have your weaker units that aren't itemized that die first. You want it to be as far away from the enemy carry as possible because you want this unit to try and have as much time to do as much damage as possible. If you put your unit towards the center of the back line, a lot of times what ends up happening is as these frontline units die, let's say all of them die, even your main tank, I'll put them off to the side over here. Let's say all of your frontline dies, these guys are going to walk up, and as you can see, they're going to be closer to targeting this guy. If he's in the corner, a lot of times the main units will go towards the center and they'll kill off these guys first, which gives him a little bit more time to do damage. So it's often safest to tuck the main carry into the corner because as units die and they walk up, they'll usually target the middle units first just by the nature of how boards are set up in TFT. It's not always the case, which we'll talk about exceptions and all these rule breaks afterwards. But typically what you'll see is that you put your main carry, your main carry in a corner, either this corner or this corner, and then you put your main tank in the middle. And your main tank in the middle, basically like as these units die, your main tank is far enough away from your main carry such that your carry is safe because if your rest of your units die, these guys are all around here, and then your backline is still safe because this is accepting the brunt of the damage. That is typical TFT positioning. There are many other ways you can position your units, which we'll talk about shortly. Now, typically, the corner that you pick for this unit is usually going to be the opposite corner of the opponent carry. That is just a general tip because, like I said, you don't want this unit, you don't want to be too close such that this unit like if your front line dies, right? Let's say they're all dead. I'll put them in the corner because they're all dead. You don't want these units to walk up and your main damage dealer to get hit first, right? Because this Zoe has a very large range, so she might hit the Heimer here. She's not guaranteed to hit the middle. So if you put the Heimer here, then the Zoe's going to pick off these other backline units. And depending on how many backline and frontline units you have, sometimes that can be the difference maker in the fight. So typically, you're putting your carry on the opposite side. That is the little intro part. Now we're going to talk about some nuances and some other aspects of the game. But if you're brand new to TFT, that's typically what it is. It's main tank in the center of the front line and your main carry in the corner of the opposite side of the other carry. That's like the main general idea of positioning. So we'll talk about early game positioning in a bit. We'll talk about early game positioning now, actually. So let's just make a new board. So early game. There's a main concept in TFT with positioning that it's always a matter of frontline and backline. So let's just like frontline, backline, that's what you'll hear all the time. That's basically the majority of TFT is just playing around your front line and playing around the opponent's backline. So let's just put a Tristana here and let's put this, right? A lot of times when you're playing your early game, depending on the units, let's just upgrade a front line here. So I'm going to put 2-star, 2-star, and I'll put 2-star backline, and I'll put 2-star backline, right? Let's say that Tristana's in this corner, and my Ezreal's over here. What would be the better position if I was the Ezreal player? Early game, you always want to be targeting the weakest units. Whoever's front line dies first is usually the board that is going to lose first. So over here, there is a Rel 2, and there is a Set 2. we don't know if we can take out this set really easily. Ideally, what we want is we want all of our units, both the front line and the back line units, to be hitting this set eventually so that the set dies. The same thing applies to this side with the Tristana. You eventually want to kill this Rel, so it's better to have more people focus firing on the Rel to make sure the Rel actually dies. Well, how do you do that? Well, you don't want to target the set first, because by targeting the set first, this Steb basically gets a free pass for most of the game to just exist and cast his ability, right? In this case, for example, Steb has a heal effect on his 2 closest allies. So if nobody's killing this Steb is weak, right? He's a 1-star Steb. Maybe he doesn't have any items. Let's say we put items on Set, for example. Boom, I'll put an item on Set. Who do you want to target here? You don't want to target the Set right away, because the Set is an upgraded unit with an item. It's hard to kill. Instead, you want to target this shitter. This guy, he helps the board out by existing. Of course, he has an ability that can heal the Set. You want to get rid of him as soon as possible, because the longer this guy lives, the more stable the opponent's board is. You want to crack holes in your opponent's board. You want to find the angle such that you can beat their board early game. And even if you're not trying to win early game, a lot of times you can save HP. We don't know if this Tristana, let's say this Tristana has more items than us, right? Let's say this guy, he got like really lucky and he got like an item augment or something, and us, we don't have good items, so we didn't slam any items, right? This obviously this board is going to beat us, right? If you look at our board, we have Ezreal, no synergy, frontline, no items. This guy's a way stronger board, right? I'm not saying that you need to win the fight, but what I'm saying is, if you try and target this Set, the chances are you're not going to be able to kill it before the rest of your units die. You want to position the Ezreal on the opposite side here. Now, why is that? Because this way, the Ezreal is going to target the Steb first. That guarantees that you kill one unit here. This is very important early game, whether you're trying to streak, whether you're trying to lose streak, win streak, it does not matter. A lot of times killing units is going to save you HP, and that's going to be very effective towards your late game. Early game, a lot of times people just sit and they're like, well, hands behind back. That's it. That's the early game. Time to warm up my dinner, and I'm going to start eating, and I'll come back on stage 3. It's like, no, you got to focus on every single fight. You got to look at everybody, that's what they're doing. You got eyes on a swivel, right? Head on a swivel. You're looking for everybody, any way that you can kill a unit early game. And that can also affect you to win out on certain rounds. So for example, here, if you position your Ezreal on the opposite side, you kill off the Steb first. Now the Steb can't heal. Now the Steb can't heal the Set. I should have picked people with different letters, names, but you know what I mean. The Steb can't heal the Set. Now you have more people focus firing on the Set. You might even be able to kill the Set, and maybe you win the round, especially if you guys have similar items. Whenever you're looking early game, the main thing in TFT, it pretty much applies in almost every stage of TFT, but it's usually the person whose front line dies first is usually the person that loses the round. So what you want to do is you want to pick away their front line to overwhelm the stronger tanks, such that the stronger tank now can't do anything anymore, right? There's no point in leaving excess units alive. You want to try and remove all the excess unit, trim the fat, and have as much of your resources focused on the tank at the end, and then eventually kill the enemy carry. That is the idea behind TFT most of the time. And that's what early positioning your board matters. Now, let's say you needed to lose streak, and let's say you weren't sure. There's situations like, for example, let's say I slammed items because another person in the lobby was really strong, and now I'm fighting this person, and I don't know if I'll necessarily beat them. You can also use this to help yourself lose streak. So you can also purposely position to target the Set so that you don't kill the Steb, so that you live a little bit, so you lose the round guaranteed. There's obviously situations where this doesn't apply all the time, but most of the time what you're trying to do is you're trying to target the lower cost, weaker, less itemized, less upgraded units, kill them off earlier in order to try and give yourself the best chance of either winning the round or killing enough units such that you don't run into a problem where you lose it. Even if you lose the round, you don't want to lose too much HP. Every unit that lives takes more HP off of your tactician, even if you lose. So that's the idea with early game positioning. We'll talk about more complex examples later, of course. So just as a general rule of thumb, and then late game positioning, there's many different things that can apply. So here we're going to talk about different types of carries, so different types of backline carries. We're going to talk about your main tank, where you should place it, as well as soloing versus everybody in the front line. So we're going back to this board with the Sentinels, right? In this board, all of my units, as you can see, I put my main tank in the center. Main tank in the center is just a reliable way to make sure that you don't get into a difficult situation later in the game, because if your units are misaligned in a certain way, then it leaves gaps in your defenses. Main tank in the center works well here because even if all the other units die, the main like basically the tank being in the center, it's almost like a peg on like a ping pong, what's it called, a pinball board, right? You want it to be in an obstructive place such that like none of your other units are getting targeted of your backline units. So like even if all of the other frontline units die, this Alawi is going to be close enough such that the other frontline units won't be able to wrap around it, right? If I put my Alawi all the way on this side and all of these units die, this Rennie can go anywhere, right? She can target the Jace. The Jace is equidistant here to the Rennie as the Alawi. So that's why it's a little bit awkward sometimes to put the Alawi or your main tank not in the center. But obviously it's matchup dependent, right? A lot of times it depends on what the matchup is, but that's why typically you put your tank in the center here. You also want to position it in such a way that, you know, it doesn't have to be dead center all the time. You typically want your main tank, because your main tank is the one with all the items and everything else, you want the opponent to be wasting as much of their time as possible attacking the main tank rather than attacking extra units a lot of the time. So for example, here I have Zoe, which has an AoE effect. I want to find somebody that doesn't have an AoE effect. I want to find somebody that just hits one unit at a time. I'm looking. They kind of all have a little bit of an AoE. Let's take I don't know, let's take Twitch, I guess. Twitch hits multiple units, but let's just take a Twitch for example here with the Bruiser setup, right? Twitch, a lot of the times he's trying to melt with a Guinsoo and he's trying to hit as many units as possible, right? A lot of times with Twitch, if you just put your main tank like closer to the Twitch, for example, he loses like some value, which we'll talk about later with sniper value, right? He loses sniper value because sniper, you want to be as far away from people as possible, but additionally he gets stuck on the Alawi, right? This is really important. If you're not concerned with the opponent's front line being much stronger than yours, a lot of time, and like, you know, your front line dying very easily, a lot of times you want to position your tank in such a way that they're absorbing a lot of damage and actually doing the tanking, right? If I put my Alawi over here, is this good positioning? No, because all of these units are going to die for free because of the Twitch, and then by the time the Alawi enters the fight, she's going to be overwhelmed. A lot of times it's a little bit better to just like get the main carry stuck on your tank. So like while center is like the general, this is an okay positioning against everybody, if you're trying to position specifically for other units or other people, what you want to do is you want to try and get the enemy carry stuck on your tank. That's the idea. You want to be like glue. You want to be like super glue on your tank as early as possible, because if they're stuck on your tank, then all of these units aren't really going to be taking damage, and if they're not taking damage, it kind of contributes to your whole front line being stronger. Remember what I said before, the most important part about TFT, front line and back line, what usually dictates the outcome of a fight is whoever's front line dies first. So you always want to look at your front line and look at the opponent's front line. In this case, let's look at our two front lines. It's obviously a hyperbolized example, but if you look at our two front lines, my front line, like the Sentinel front line, is clearly better than the other front line. So I don't have to worry too much about losing or winning this fight, because this Twitch he doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell because my front line is stronger. A lot of times, if you see an opponent that has upgraded front line, or like how do I phrase it? Usually if your opponent has upgraded front line, there's a good chance that they're going to beat you. Especially if you're contested, like let's say there's another Sentinel Heimer board. A lot of times upgraded front line is more important than upgraded back line. Having a strong front line is way more reliable and consistent, because as long as your carry has enough time to get multiple casts off, a lot of times they will reach the number, like a saturation point, to do the amount of damage necessary to win the round. The parts where things fall apart is when your tank is so unupgraded, you don't have any frontline upgrades, they all die instantly, and then whether or not you have a 2-star or a 3-star or whatever kind of tank, it can be anything in your backline, what ends up happening is they get overwhelmed because they get instantly targeted and there's still frontline to deal with, and you just lose the fight. That brings up a major point about positioning. Let's go back to like a Zoe. Let's just say we're going against a secondary Heimer, right? Let's say it's Heimer versus Heimer, right? Heimer versus Heimer. Typically what I said is you want main tank in the center, but depending on where the unit is, you might want to put your tank closer to the enemy carry, just so that they absorb some of the damage earlier. So for example, let's say this is my board, and let's just say like, I need some extra sentinels here, right? So I have a 6 sentinel, Alawi 2, and let's say this guy has Heimer 2-star, but I have Heimer 1-star, right? Same items. I'm just gonna remove the items just so that, like, you know, it is what it is, right? Let's say this is a board and then there's some extra trash on the board that doesn't really matter. If you evaluate and you look at the board and you say to yourself, wow, I have a better front line than the opponent's front line, a lot of times it's a benefit for you to put your main carry closer to their carry, like on the same side, right? The reason is that their front line is going to die first. If their front line dies first, then these guys walk up. The Heimer is still going to be attacking the front line. If you put your carry closer to theirs, it increases the chance of you eliminating their carry first. And as soon as their carry dies, then the round's actually over. A lot of times, like if your front line is better, it's good to position in the same way as the opponent, like on the same side, like you mirror them, right? If you're the stronger player, you win the mirror a lot of the time because there's no like funny business that can happen with the board, right? Imagine if they have like different backline carries, for example. Like let's say your board looks like this and they're playing 4 sentinel and instead they have, I don't know, they have Jace and Ezreal. Let's make it a more realistic so you guys understand what I'm trying to explain here, right? Let's say this is their board, right? This is their board and they have 3 items on Heimerdinger. They have a Heimerdinger 2 with 3 items, right? If I look at their board, right, our boards might be comparable, right? It costs around the same gold, right? I have an Alawi 2, they have a Heimer 2, I have a Rumble, they have a Jace. These boards are comparable, right? This is like a contested situation where their board looks similar to my board. In this situation, I would say the Alawi player almost always wins. The reason that, or the one with the Alawi 2 almost always wins. The reason is that with good positioning, this front line will die first. And once the front line dies, then all of these carries or all of these tanks basically walk up and start killing the back line. And at that point, the round is over. Even though they have more damage than I do, it's not usually going to be close because I have the upgraded front line. I have 6 sentinel and I have Alawi 2. This guy has 4 sentinel and he has Alawi 1. So there's 2 things that can go wrong here. For example, let's say I'm playing Heimer and I put my Heimer on the opposite side. Now this fight becomes a little bit more stressful. Their main damage dealer is Heimer. If you don't know, Heimer also scales as the fight goes on. So it's in the opponent's best interest to be on opposite side. Because what ends up happening is, even if his front line dies, right, my front line will, some of them will die, right? Let's just take out all the shitters. Let's imagine that everybody dies except my Alawi, right? If I'm on opposite side here, my Alawi, sorry, I'm moving them out of the way. My Alawi is going to walk up this way, and I'm going to target the Ezreal and the Jace. And my Heimer is going to walk up this way, and he's going to target the Ezreal and the Jace. It's increasing a level of RNG here, because the main thing that I want to remove, in order for this fight to be over, I just want to get rid of this Heimerdinger, right? I don't need this Heimerdinger to have more time to do damage, because if he happens to kill the Alawi, and then my Heimer is left over in a 1v1 situation here, I'm going to lose the 1v1, because my Heimer is shit compared to his, right? It increases a lot of the variance, right? But while this guy's attacking Alawi, I want to be able to kill the Heimer here. But instead, if I position on opposite side and my front line is better, I'm still stronger than him, right? I should theoretically win, but my Heimer's going to waste time killing the Ezreal and killing the Jace before killing the Heimer. That's all wasted time that increases the RNG of the outcome. Like, it makes it so that I might not win this fight even though I feel like I should. That's why whenever you have a stronger front line, that's the idea that I'm trying to explain. If you have a stronger front line, you try to position on the same side as the enemy carry, barring that there's no extraneous circumstances, because if all of these units die, and you start walking up, this guy is going to be targeting Alawi, so you don't have to worry about your Heimer taking damage, because your front line is better, so your front line can still front line, and then you start killing their carry. If you kill their carry first, then the round's over. That's the final straw to make the round end. That's why you also want your like, you know, getting stuck on the tank as well, right? Like, if you're positioning strictly against this guy and you know you're fighting him, you know, you probably want to put your Alawi either here or here to try and soak up as much of the Heimer damage as possible. This Heimer is going to waste time trying to kill Alawi. These units, while they don't do that much damage, they are going to contribute to the overall outcome of the fight, because, like, you know, if you have these guys attacking this Alawi and this Crystal, it gives you time for them to actually do something. Even though they're mostly tanks, you just want as many units alive as possible. That's like the basic idea, right? And same thing applies vice versa, right? If you are the person with the weaker front line, you want to position on opposite side, because you might be able to cheese around here, right? If you put your Heimer here, let's say this guy positioned for me in particular, right? I think, haha, I've beat you, and then he moves his thing here. Well, what ends up happening is this Heimer's going to kill all of these units. I'm not going to get stuck on the Alawi, right? By the time all of these units die, my frontline Alawi, my Alawi might actually live. Like, this guy's Alawi might actually live because he has more damage. And by the time, like, at the end of the fight, it's a little bit unclear who exactly is going to win. Right? It's unclear here. Obviously, like, you know, I don't have any, it's an exaggerated example. I don't have items on this Heimerdinger or stuff like that. But I'm just saying, in these type of situations, it becomes less clear. And even though this person has a much weaker front line, they have a good chance of potentially winning the round. And that's what you have to look for, right? If you have to always look for your best out in order to actually win the round that you can. So this is just like talking about this. There's one other thing I want to talk about, which is solo frontline. So sometimes what you'll see people do is to guarantee that you get stuck on the opponent's carry. Sometimes if you have a Giga frontline unit, so let's say in this case, you'll see people do something like this, right? This is called solo frontlining. A lot of times, this isn't necessarily that great with Alawi, but I'm going to show you an example just in general. A lot of times solo frontline is a good idea if you have like one frontline unit that does anything. You know what this is better for? This is better for rebels. I'm going to put rebels in, right? Rebels. Rebel. Let's just make a rebel board real fast. 1 second, everybody. 7 rebel. Perfect. So here I'm fighting rebel against sentinel, right? I have an Alawi too. A lot of times when you're playing, and let's say you have like a Giga Alawi, like she has all of the tank items, right? She has like the Giga build, right? Bramble Vest, maximum armor, Dragon Claw, maximum what's it called? Magic resist, and then she has Warmogs for maximum HP. Right? She has like all the defensive stats. Where's Warmogs? I'm fucking lost. Okay, Warmogs. Right? A lot of times here, when you're playing Rebel, for example, right? This is a different board, but the idea is that let's say you have only one tank that really does anything, and you don't have a large tank synergy, right? Here I'm only playing 2 Sentinel, right? This set doesn't tank shit. This Akali doesn't tank shit, right? This Irelia doesn't tank shit. Like, these guys aren't worth anything. They're on the board just for synergy, and they're here to just kind of help out with a little bit of extra damage. You know, Set has a stun, Akali has some extra damage, stuff like that, right? But these guys aren't tank units. They're not going to tank anything. So in this type of situation, do you really want to put them all up here? No, because they're just going to die instantly anyways. Instead, what you want to do is you want all of the enemy units to basically be targeting this one unit here, right? Right now, Ezreal's targeting Alawi, Heimer's targeting Alawi, Jace is targeting Alawi, everybody's targeting Alawi here. Because Alawi is your main tank and she's doing everything, what you did is you got everybody stuck on the Alawi. And in doing so, all of these other units now aren't taking damage. They can just exist and do extra work without dying. It's really beneficial a lot of times, especially if you have not too many strong units. Like, this is a rebel board, so it's a little bit fake. But imagine if I had, like, let's say I have an Mbessa, right? Let's say I have an Mbessa on this board, right? And let's say my Mbessa has items here. Sometimes this happens with Rebel, right? I have Rebel Emblem, Mbessa, and she has, like, you know, this and, I don't know, this. Sure, whatever, right? What I want to do is I don't want this Mbessa to be in the front line. Even though she contributes to the front line, she's very strong. She's a good portion of the extra damage that I can do. So by getting everybody stuck on this Alawi, my Mbessa has free reign to basically jump around and kill off everybody, while the Heimer is wasting all his time trying to kill the Alawi. This is the idea of solo frontline positioning. Sometimes you solo frontline because what it does is it allows your other units to actually have breathing room and to do something, whether or not they're frontline or backline units. This is really potent in rerolls a lot of the time. A lot of times in rerolls, you'll have 1 3-star frontline unit, and a lot of times you'll see combinations like Gargoyle, right? Gargoyle gives you extra armor and magic resist for every enemy targeting the holder. This isn't something that's meta right now, but it's something that's very common with reroll lines in particular. What you do is you just stack Gargoyles on a singular frontline unit. They gain a bunch of armor because of the Gargoyle stone plates, and because they're targeted by everybody, they get a lot of value off of that. This is a completely separate idea. I'm not saying this is the optimal way to play Rebels, but I'm just saying this is something you might often see when rerolls become very meta. But the idea of solo frontlining is such that you can make all, like, remember I was saying before, you want them to get stuck on your tank. You want the tank to be like super glue to the enemy carry. So it actually helps out quite a bit to build a unit, if they're like the only frontline unit that you want, you can just solo frontline them to guarantee that everybody hits that one particular unit. It works a lot with hero augments. It works a lot with what's it called, with like rerolls a lot of times, because like rerolls a lot, you usually just have your 3-star frontline, so then you just make that be your main tank. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about specific 4 and 5 costs. I'm going to go through every 4 cost. I'm going to go through all the backline options first, and then after that, we're going to go through the frontline options, which are the melee carries. But here we're going to talk about all the tanks and all of the backline units, and I'm going to talk about the positioning of what they want and why it works with their kit. Because we basically just gave you a rough framework, right? I worked on just explaining to you positioning and general idea that you should have going into each fight. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at all of the units one by one. So I'm going to go through every 4 cost, and then I'm going to go through every 5 cost, and I'm going to explain what this unit does and what they want to do. So here, just for sake of example, because I'm going through 4 costs, I'm going to make a fake frontline, which is going to be 2 bruiser on the opposite side, both 1 cost, and on this side, it's going to be 2 1 cost tank units, just for the sake of illustration. So this side is going to be Sentinel, the other side is going to be Bruiser. These aren't optimal boards in any way, shape, or form, but I'm just trying to explain, hey, this is what you do. And then on the opposite side, I'm going to put a random backline unit that doesn't do like any sort of funny business. So let's just put a Lux here, right? There we go. Should make sense. This is just for illustrative purposes. We're always going to be taking the perspective of this side of the board, and I'm going to put the unit, I'm going to explain what they want to do. So let's say this is frontline, backline, and we're trying to figure out how to position Zoe. If you read Zoe's ability, she launches a star at the target that deals magic damage. It bounces to the farthest enemy within 4 hexes, then bounces back to the target. So what you typically want to do with Zoe is 4 hexes is approximately the distance from frontline to backline, right? If you count 1, 2, 3, 4, right? If you have a 4 hex unit, they will hit on the opposite side of the board, right? This is exactly 4 hexes, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So when you think about the furthest unit within 4 hexes, it's basically wherever you would hit the front line, it would go to the back line. That's the idea. The furthest unit 4 hexes away. When you think about Zoe, the main way that you want to position Zoe is on same side as the enemy carry. If you can, irrespective of the other aspects of the game, because Zoe has this effect where she can hit the furthest unit, you want to position her in such a way where she's on the same side as the enemy carry, because then when she does her bubble bounce or her star bounce, whatever you want to call it, it has a good chance of sniping the backline, right? Sniping the backline is very important for Zoe because she doesn't do that much damage. She does burst damage, but she doesn't do like a huge amount often. So a lot of times when you build Zoe, that's why I often say, hey, a really cool build for Zoe is putting something like JG on her, or like JG Guard Breaker, because we just give her a lot of crit chance and then she snipes the backline. So she'll go here, the ball will bounce and has a good chance of hitting the backline, and then maybe it just one-shots and kills them, especially if they're a low unupgraded unit, right? If they have like a Heimer 1, if they have a Zoe that's a Zoe 1, if you have a Zoe 2 that's really strong, you want to snipe the backline. Additionally, when you're playing against Zoe, you want to be on opposite side for the same reason. Because if you're on opposite side, the Zoe's going to be targeting here, right? Like it's going to target this one. Here, I should position it properly for this case. I was trying to make it fit on the screen. But when Zoe targets this front line, if you count the hexes 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, like it's too far away if you're on the opposite side of the Zoe. So you never want to be on the same side as Zoe, because here, 1, 2, right? If you're targeting this guy, 1, 2, 3, 4, you can still hit the back line. But if you're on opposite side, it's often too far away because the Zoe is going to be targeting these units first, right? And these units, it's going to be too far for it to bounce, so you can keep your carry alive without getting cheesed. So that's typically how you play around Zoe. I don't know why I started with Zoe, by the way. That's like completely not alphabetical order. Corki. So Corki has this effect where he reduces armor, and he locks onto the target, and then he strafes to a nearby position. He hits all enemies. It's split between all enemies within 2 hexes. So he has a good tank busting ability, especially if they have a bunch of armor on their stuff. Corki's positioning doesn't matter all that much because he moves around. So if you put him in the corner, a lot of times it's just like starting position. If there's a unit that can kill him easily, you just don't want to put him on the same side. But typically, you're going to try and make him as a tank buster, right? So a lot of times Corki is in conjunction with another carry. Like often you see Corki with M-Pesa, for example. You just want to align them such that they're both hitting the same units. A good thing about TFT with the hexes is that based on like however much range you have, so in this case Corki has 4 range, if you put him here, right, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, he'll always target this guy. If you put him here, then he's going to target either this guy or this guy. If you put him here, he'll always target this guy, etc. So the idea is that you just want to align it so that he's targeting the same unit as your other carry, just to make sure that you're doing the burst damage. Otherwise, you can keep him in the corner to be safe. He will move around, right? He moves here, he moves here, he moves here. He does this strafing effect, so it's totally fine wherever you want to place him. Additionally, I talked about this in my scrap video. If you have scrap activated, so here I'll put scrap in just for fun, often you put Corki in the front line. So the reason you put Corki in the front line is because if your Corki takes damage, he will cast faster. There's an aspect of TFT that as you get hit, you generate mana. That's another way of generating mana. Generating mana is really good for Corki because the earlier he gets his cast off, that's where most of his damage comes from, because he's not really an auto attacker. He's more of like a caster AD unit. When you get the an earlier cast, it helps you out a lot, and he moves anyways, so he gets out of danger's way, right? He's not always permanently a frontline unit. Like, you don't have to build him like a tank, because he absorbs a little bit of damage, he gets his cast off, and then he runs away. Additionally, the reason this is important when you have scrap activated is because there's a scrap shield that is only active for a certain amount of time. You actually get to make use of the scrap shield, as opposed to putting Corki in the back line. The scrap shield is going to expire anyways. You might as well put him in the front line. He gets used to the scrap shield, he gets an earlier cast off, and then by the time the scrap shield expires, he basically took no damage. So you don't even have the deficit of him in the front line taking damage before he gets his cast off. Now, obviously, that's a situational thing. That's just something also to note about Corki in particular. Next, let's go to Heimerdinger. So Heimerdinger, Heimer has an effect where he scales really deep into a fight. So you typically want to put him in either corner, right? If you have a stronger front line, same side corner. If you have a weaker front line, opposite side corner, barring other units that are carries, just to make sure that you don't actually like grief your Heimer, right? So for example, against a Zoe, you want to be on opposite side. But usually you're going to try and be on opposite side just to keep him as safe as possible, tucked away in a corner. But it just depends situationally, like what I said before. He also fires missiles that I think they hit, he fires the missiles that hit the main unit, but then it also hits like additional units that are next to them a lot of the time. So sometimes you want to put him somewhere in the middle here. I wouldn't recommend putting Heimer in the middle unless you have another unit that you want to put in your corner. So for example, let's say you have an upgraded Jace, or you have an upgraded other like visionary, something like a Malzahar. I don't know who, but sometimes if Heimer is not your main damage dealer anymore, then instead of putting him in the corner, you can put him a little bit closer to the center, and then he has the rocket firing effect that he hits multiple of the frontline units. But either way, it's very situational, but you're often going to place him in the corner to keep him as safe as possible. Next, we can talk about Backline Elise. I didn't talk about Backline Elise. So Backline Elise is a rare carry that she's getting buffed next patch, so she might be more relevant starting tomorrow. But basically what she does is she fires off these spiders that crawl slowly and do a bunch of damage. Elise is very weird because the spiders that she does targets multiple enemies, so there's a lot of times where she could snipe the backline. So I would often recommend putting Elise on the same side as the opponent's carry, or positioning your front line in such a way that there's like a gaping hole that the Elise can then try and snipe the enemy with. Because what happens is she launches these spiders and then they slowly walk, and then they just absolutely delete backline units. So you basically want there to be like, you want it to be able, like, you can take a ruler and draw a line between your Elise and the enemy carry. So you want to position your front line around that. So for example, if I have a center front line, I want to be on the same side as this unit. If they're on the opposite side, then maybe I want to put my tanks more on this side, so that the Elise, when she launches a spider, there's one that can sneak through and kill the enemy carry. That's typically the best positioning for Elise. If you're fighting against an Elise, you want to make sure your front line is wide enough to make sure that the Elise doesn't get a spider to sneak through to kill one of the backline units. Next, we'll go to Silco. So Silco, same as Heimer, you usually want him to be in a corner opposite side of the carry. He has this effect where he has monstrosities that deal damage to extra units. So he has a little bit of an AoE effect, but is not strong enough to be on the same side as the enemy carry a lot of the time, in my opinion. You want him to scale up because he's a Dominator, right? He has a if you have Dominator active, he scales as the fight goes on. So you want him to be tucked away in a corner, usually the opposite side of the carry. Unless you have a really strong front line, then for that reason you want to be on the same side. Twitch. So Twitch, positioning for and against Twitch kind of fucking sucks. And I'll tell you why. So Twitch is a sniper, right? If you read it here, snipers, the further away you are, the more damage that they deal. So if you are playing Twitch, you always want to be on the opposite side of the carry. It doesn't matter what. There's no reason for you to ever not be on opposite side. You always want to be on the opposite side because Sniper gets the most amount of value if you're on opposite side. The problem with Sniper being on opposite side is that Twitch, you cannot position because Twitch is Experiment, right? If you know about Experiment, I'll highlight Experiment just in case. Experiment causes you to have your Twitch sit in a hex that is predetermined at the beginning of the fight. So if Twitch has to sit in one spot, there's no way to reposition Twitch. You basically just have to put him on the Experiment hex. Experiment is too important for Twitch for you not to be putting him in that particular spot. So no matter what, you're kind of stuck in the same spot. So you can't really position. There's no way to reposition with him. And that's a huge deficit to him because he's not that strong that it's like that's like game winning a lot. Like, you know, he's not like, he needs to be in the Experiment hex, but Experiment isn't at a point where it's so strong that it's like warrants that type of positioning, in my opinion. Because what ends up happening is, like, let's say you're playing against a Twitch. Wow, he just lost all his damage. You know what's even better? Wow, he just lost all his damage. You know what I mean? If you're fighting against a Twitch, just put everybody on the same side as the Twitch. What the fuck is he gonna do? He can't move. He can't move. He's stuck. He's Experiment. He's stuck in the corner. That's him in the corner, and that's me in the spotlight. You know what I mean? The round's over. So Twitch is really easy to position for and against, but you're kind of just stuck because of Experiment hexes. There are ways to remedy this, which we'll talk about in a second. I already talked about Zoe, so actually I can go into 5 cost now, and this is a good transition because I can just talk about Caitlyn, right? A lot of times to remedy this, like, Caitlyn's also a sniper, so the same thing applies. So if they try and group themselves on this side, a lot of times people will just put Caitlyn on the opposite side. Whenever you're playing Twitch, you're typically playing Caitlyn as well, so now Caitlyn gets maximum sniper value. It's why Twitch is, in part, like, there's a lot of reasons why Twitch is really dependent on Caitlyn, but it's part of the reason why it's really dependent on Caitlyn. Jace, we're talking about backline Jace here. So with backline Jace, it doesn't say it here, but he has a little bit of like an AoE effect where he hits like 2 units. They're basically a hex crystal that then explodes and hits multiple units. So sometimes you'll see people not, like, Jace in the corner is fine, but sometimes you'll see people put Jace like either here or here, like somewhere closer to the middle. It's just to get more of like a tank busting effect where the AoE hits multiple of the frontline units. Obviously you want your Jace to be as safe as possible, so you don't want to put him in like some awkward spot where he's going to get sniped or very easily killed, but you usually want to put him so that you can try and delete as many of the frontline units as possible, so you get a little bit more value if you put him closer to the center than if you put him towards the actual like edge of the screen, like on the corner. Next we have Jinx. Jinx, you just want her to be safe, so it's usually a corner opposite side of the enemy carry unless there's a reason not to be. Jinx just takes a lot of time to cast, and she hits the whole board anyways with her rocket, so you don't really care too much about her positioning. One thing that's really important with Jinx though, however, is if they have tank units. So for example, let me put one more tank unit. One of her casts, I don't know which one it is, where is it? The Zap. The Zap deals physical damage in a line and then stuns units. So often you'll put Jinx on the same side as the enemy carry, because if they have their tanks towards the middle of the screen, when Jinx fires her Zap, she'll actually stun the backline, which is very, very substantial. It can actually sway the fight. So in order to get the stun off on the backline, you can put Jinx on the same side as the enemy carry. The only time I would recommend this if the enemy carry isn't one that's going to absolutely decimate you, or if your front line is really bad, then I wouldn't even bother with it. But the Zap on the same side is very important. Other than that, you usually just try and keep her safe. But, you know, of course, if you have enough front line and you're going to get the rocket off anyways, the Zap stun is very important. So here, for example, she'll be targeting the Rennie first. As soon as she gets her first cast off, bang, she gets the Zap. This gets stunned. It can easily sway the fight. So that's something to keep note of. LeBlanc usually just put in the middle. She has this effect where she just like does a giant AoE anyways. So you usually don't really care about her being strictly in the center or strictly in the corner. You also want her to try and hit like the main tank and as many units as possible. So you want her like Black Rose chains to go everywhere. So a lot of times it's usually in the middle. That's really nice. Yeah. So it's like, it's usually the nearest four units. So sometimes you can put it in the corner and try, but she's not usually going to snipe the back line. Because she doesn't do that much burst damage. So a lot of times you're just trying to use her like a tank buster effect. So you just like apply the effect to all of the tanks and try and like have them all get deleted. Or you put utility items on her and you're trying to apply it to all the tanks as much as possible. So you usually put her closer to the center than towards the edges. Malzahar has this effect where he has a little bit of an AoE. But depending on if Malzahar is your main carry or not, if he's not your main carry, he has like a shredding and an AoE effect, so you usually put him towards the middle, just so that he gets like the maximum value off of hitting as many units as possible. If you're using him as a main carry though, then you want to keep him safe, either in corner, opposite side, or same side, depending on your front line. And then we have all melee units. So now we're going to go on to melee carries. So these are going to be melee carries, and I'm also going to talk about the tanks at this point in time. So if you were curious or interested in seeing the tanks, we're going to go through them all now, and it's going to go through all the rest of the 4 and 5 costs. So here I'm going to remove my front line just so I can talk about them. So Mbessa. Actually, maybe I should keep a little bit of front line. Let me keep a little bit of front line, actually. I changed my mind. So Mbessa is a melee unit, but she also has like a 2 hex range. It says here that she's only 1 range, but her first ability is that she has like +1 range. So a lot of times you can actually put her in second row. If you think that she needs to be your main tank, such that you want her to be like, for example, let's say you're playing her with Garen and you're playing an emissary board, then Garen you want to play next to the Mbessa, just so that the Mbessa gets as much HP as possible, right? So then you can put her in the front line. Either or is fine, but typically you put her in a second row just to keep her safe. If you're playing Mbessa, what you don't want to do is you don't want to put your melee carries on the edge of the screen. Ever, or you don't want them to put them here, right? If you have an enemy carry, so for example, let's say this Lux, who is this Lux going to hit first? The Lux is always going to hit the unit on the closest unit first, so it's going to target the Mbessa instantly. You don't want this Mbessa to be targeted first, because you kind of want her to run around freely. If she attacks and then dashes the back line, she's still getting melted by the enemy carry. Here it doesn't look impressive because it's the Lux, but imagine if it was a Heimerdinger, or a Jace, or somebody that actually does a bunch of damage. What ends up happening is, it doesn't matter where she goes, now they're stuck on my melee carry, right? Even though the melee carry is sometimes the tank, you really have to evaluate whether or not it's your because it's also your damage dealer, right? Because it's your main damage dealer, you'd rather this unit be attacking another tank, like maybe a Garen or somebody else, so that your Mbessa has free reign, so she doesn't take too much damage early. Because if she gets focus fired early and just dies instantly, then you lose all of your damage in addition to your tank. So that's why a lot of times I usually just put her in second row. Then by the time she dashes, there's usually a couple units that are dead already. If she gets aggroed, then the fight's already well underway, so it's not that big of an issue. Additionally, if their front line looks really weird, so for example, let's say this is a weird front line, sometimes you can put in Mbessa in such a way that she tries to wrap the back line, right? Like let's say their front line is split like this, for example, like I don't know, this is a very extreme example, but sometimes you'll try and put your Mbessa here, because if she wraps the back line, the best case scenario is that Mbessa gets onto the enemy carry. If she gets onto the enemy carry, she has a stun effect, which can basically end the fight instantly. Not only is she going to do massive damage to the enemy carry, she can also stun them, and then that actually just ends the fight. It's just GG on the spot at that point, because then they stop doing damage, and she's doing damage to them, the fight's over. It's over, right? Next, we have Mundo. So Mundo, general tank, right? You either want to place him in the center, where he's your main tank. If you're playing him in a board that has a lot of tanks, right? So a lot of times when you play Mundo, you play Dominators. So you're usually playing like multiple main tanks, right? You're playing like Garen, Mundo, and everybody else. Whenever you're playing these units, I should mention it right now. I'll mention it after with Black Rose. I'll talk about Black Rose after and where to position your Scion. But Mundo can be like the first unit that takes a bunch of damage, because he does have like this nice big healing effect. But often you're going to put something else in this corner, and then Mundo can often be in the middle, because Mundo is a Dominator. He scales with time. So as long as your Mundo doesn't die first, he'll be really tanky later in the fight, because he's going to do more magic damage, and he heals more because his healing is also based on his AP. They actually buffed it so it works better with his his AP. So he benefits a lot from living long because of the Dominator trait. So instead of him being the focus fire first tank dead, a lot of times you want to put him in the center, a little bit safer from the edges, just so he's not like the first unit that dies. Echo similar to Mbessa, he's not 2 hex range though. So if you're confident, a lot of times with melee carries like this, you can also tuck them in the center. So for example, he's a 1 range. So if Lux here is the backline unit, she attacks Irelia first, this Echo will be able to cast and start doing damage. So a lot of times you can tuck them somewhere in the middle, just so that the enemy carry doesn't hit them. Or if their enemy carry is in the middle, then you put them on the edge. The idea is that you just don't want your melee carry to be targeted first, because if they're targeted first, then they might just die instantly. Sometimes they could be targeted first if you have certain effects, right? Like let's say this guy has an Edge of Night, right? An Edge of Night is fine if he gets targeted first, because you just proc the Edge of Night and then you lose the aggro. But typically what you want to do is you want to just tuck them somewhere in the middle so they're a little bit more safe. Elise, gets a lot of value off getting her stun off. Depending on if your Elise is tanky enough to live and get the cast off or not, you typically want to have Elise close to the enemy carry. The reason is that Elise jumps to a nearby hex and she stuns all enemies within 2 hexes. So if she stuns everybody within 2 hexes, you want her to jump somewhere here, right here or here, because then you have a good chance of her stunning the enemy carry, and that can sway the fight dramatically. You don't want to put her on the opposite side of the carry and then stunning nobody. Like, who's getting stunned here? Nobody. You want to put her on the same side as the enemy carry almost always. It's just a matter of whether or not you put her directly in front so she's taking first aggro, because then she might die, or if you put her a little bit closer to the middle so she actually gets the cast off. You have to decide on how tanky your Elise is. But often, if you have enough tankiness, she generates mana from getting hit, so it benefits you to put her somewhere here, just gets hit, jumps, like, you know, she can't jump that well, so she jumps here and she always stuns the back line, right? So putting her like on the far corners is very nice. It's just a matter of if she lives long enough. Garen is emissary, so he gives HP to his 2 closest neighbors. So you're never putting him on the edge. You're always putting him somewhere that he's giving HP to himself as well as 2 other units. So with Garen, you're typically putting him somewhere like that. Pretty easy. Heimer, we talked about Alawi. Alawi is usually frontline. She's very tanky in many different situations, so you can put her, literally just get stuck on the Alawi like super glue and put her right in front of the enemy carry, or you can put her somewhere in the middle such that she's a little bit more safe, and some of these units die off, but then the Alawi has enough time to scale up a little bit. Maybe like she has some maybe have some augments that scale really well, but typically you want to try and put her on the edges because you'd rather have her you'd rather have the enemy carry waste time trying to kill the Alawi. So it helps to put her directly in front of it because she doesn't have like a built-in scaling effect. Vi has a stun effect as well. A lot of times you want to put Vi on the same side as a carry or somewhere safe in the middle, because if she can get the stun off that she actually stuns the enemy carry, that's pretty good. The shockwave stuns the target, and it makes a shockwave in the row. So a lot of times, like if you have the Vi jump, and let's say she's like hitting this way, sometimes she jumps and then she hits like on a diagonal. Sometimes the stun goes like not like straight. I don't know if there's a bug or not, but I've seen it happen. But either way, you want to try and get her as close to the enemy carry as possible, such that she either turns on this unit and stuns it, or she gets to a point where she can actually stun the backline. But with Vi, she's usually pretty tanky with Pit Fighter or Emissary, or sorry, with Pit Fighter, Emissary, or Enforcer. So a lot of times she's pretty stable as a frontline unit. So basically anywhere works as long as she's not getting as long as she doesn't die instantly, she actually gets her stun off. You can put her anywhere in the front line. Frontline Jace, he has this effect where he like kidnaps somebody and like throws them in a portal or something. So usually you just want to put him like somewhere where the main tank is, so you can kind of remove the tank a little bit from the game for certain points in time. But typically you're placing him somewhere here. Additionally, Hex, we'll talk about Jace's Hex right now. Often you put in the front line. With the new patch, I'm not sure if frontline Hex is going to be the best or if you put it in second row. But basically, this is a respawning target dummy, so it can waste a lot of time, right? If this Lux is targeting the target dummy and then it dies, then she targets the tank, then the target dummy respawns, it's wasting a lot of time if you put it in the front line. Putting in the backline is really useful because it gives you like the benefits, right? If you're backline Jace with backline dummy, it gives you the extra stats. But if you're frontline Jace with frontline dummy, it gives you frontline stats instead of backline stats. But either way, a lot of times you're putting the dummy in the front line as well. I think that will still be the case, but we'll see if certain boards that are really stable in the front line, you might put the target dummy a little bit further back so that it still works to give the Jace buffs, but it doesn't necessarily die instantly. Next we have Mordekaiser. Mordekaiser, you just don't want him to die before he gets his cast off, so a lot of times you tuck him a little bit safer in the middle. You can also put him in second row so he's not the first one aggroed, right? If this Lux, for example, is getting stuck on Irelia, then the Mordekaiser has a chance to like walk over here. He kills this, then he turns around and he kills that, because he has when he casts, he has 2 range. So a lot of times like he could turn around and start like walking and killing backline units based on how many frontline units are dead. So sometimes you can put him in this spot to try and wrap. But typically just put him somewhere towards the middle of the board, because then he just like absolutely decimates everybody and then he just walks up and the fight's over. Rumble the same thing. If Rumble is your main tank, you either want to put him in the center to just do damage and be safe, or you want to put him at the edge to make sure that they're stuck on the enemy carry, so he just like tanks as much as possible. And then Savika is the same as the other melee carries. Middle is safe, edge is risky, and then second row is just so they can walk up and you get the benefit of them being safe, but also being able to potentially get a wrap or target the backline pretty easily. Okay, so that's all the 4 costs and 5 costs. Defensive positioning, so not getting wrapped and stuff like that. So let's say the opponent has a unit like Mbessa, right? I'll give you an example, right? Let's take this, and Alawi. And let's say they have Mbessa with some bruisers, right? So let's say this is my board. And let's say this is my, what do I want here? Let's say I have a Heimerdinger, right? Heimerdinger. I'm going to make it very dramatic just for the sake of example, right? Let's say they have an Mbessa here. And I have my main tank over here. Right? This is really bad positioning. Why? Because what happens is these 2 units are going to die very early. Whether or not this unit dies or this unit dies, this Mbessa, if both of these units end up dying around the same time, right? And let's say this Mbessa has a good chance of walking and killing this Heimerdinger instead of fighting the Alawi. Because if you look at it, right, look at this positioning, right? If the Mbessa is here, she has an equal chance of walking towards this Alawi as she does to walking to this Heimer, because they're both 2 hexes away. The Alawi is actually more hexes away because sometimes when the front line dies, the enemy front line walks up, and now it takes her more distance to get to the Alawi. So almost always here, she's going to actually walk towards this Heimer, and then it's GG, the fight is over. The way this happens, it happens more often than you think, and I'm sure it happens in your game. A lot of times, if you put weak units on one side of the board, right? Let's say you're putting your Alawi in the center of the board, and you put a bunch of weak units on one side of the board. This Alawi, this Mbessa sometimes dashes through, right? She dashes through. This is very common, right? You put Mbessa here. She dashes through the Singed. The Singed dies. If this Irelia, who is also weak, dies at one point, before the Mbessa gets retargets the main tank, as you can see here, 1, 2. 1, 2. Right? She's equally close. She's arguably closer to the Heimer. This is how you get wrapped, right? It happens a lot with Mbessa because she dashes through the target when she does her whole cast thing. So you always want to make sure that when you're seeing an opponent that has some sort of like dashing, jumping around frontline unit, you want to put a large tank in front of them to make sure that they're stuck on the tank, right? That's why Trenchcoat is so broken on Mbessa, because a lot of times when you have Trenchcoat, for example, like this is why this is like a game-winning synergy, which we talked about in our Ornn artifacts. Because if you have this, and then the Trenchcoat splits the Mbessa into 3, where's Mbessa? Like one of these is gonna wrap. You know what I mean? Because this Alawi dies, there's too much of a clusterfuck here. One of them is gonna turn around and kill the Heimerdinger. That's why Trenchcoat is so broken on Mbessa in particular. But the idea is that you want to put a unit that doesn't die easily, right? A lot of times people will play this board and they won't think about it too much. They'll do something like this, right? And then they'll put like the Hextech crystal for Jace, and they get wrapped instantly because the Mbessa goes here, this dies, and then she walks straight to the Heimerdinger, right? This is not an uncommon situation. This is what I'm saying. This is a more realistic example. But when you're playing Mbessa, that's what you always want to do. You always want to position her in such a way that she ends up in a spot where she attacks the main carry. So if you're trying to not get wrapped, you always want to put your tanks as close to the carry as possible. Because here you'll never get wrapped, right? Like you might get wrapped if your front line is really long and then the Mbessa like does this. Like let's find something. Let's say your front line looks like this and you have a Jace here. Like maybe the Mbessa gets here, this dies, and then she like walks all the way over here. But typically what you're trying to do is you're just trying to put like your stronger tanks. Like let's say like you have a bunch of shit frontline units, but let's say you have like, I don't know, a Rel 2, for example, in this type of setup. You want to put like your main tanks on the edges. Put all this shit in the middle. This is how you defend against getting wrapped. Because here you'll never get wrapped, right? This guy dies, right? Your front line's still alive. Either the Mbessa is going to get stuck here, and then she'll be too far away from the Heimer, or the Mbessa is going to get stuck here, and it won't be an issue, right? The Mbessa won't be able to crack the back line because you put like these pinball, like, what do you call it? Like pinball pegs on the board such that like everybody's going to get stuck on some sort of tank. If you position yourself in such a way where you put all your strong tanks in the middle against a board that has the potential to wrap you like a melee carry, then what ends up happening is sometimes all your units die. I'm just trying to move them off frame a little bit. All your units die, and then Mbessa somewhere in no man's land and just wraps your backline, and then your backline's dead before your front line's dead, and you just lose the fight because you got cheesed. That's the part that's really important. So you always want to position, if you're trying to avoid getting wrapped, you want to put your stronger tanks on the edges of your board, or the edges of your front line, to ensure that, like, you know, they're not going to be able to wrap you through the middle of the board, because there's no way that they'll target this guy before they target the middle. So you just want to put your weaker units more towards the center, if that makes sense for you guys. Also tank moving. So remember getting stuck on the tank. So like whether it's an Mbessa or it's even a backline unit, like let's just take another Heimerdinger, it benefits you a lot of times. Oops, I deleted it. It benefits you a lot of the time to put your tank on the same side as the other carries so that they get stuck on it. Now the only problem is if this Alawi isn't tanky enough, then she might just get bursted down and instantly deleted. This matters a lot with units that scale, right? Something like a Mundo, for example. A Mundo is really bad because he can get bursted down because he gets more healing as the fight goes on. He gets more damage as the fight goes on. So you want somebody like this to scale during the fight. There are many other units that are similar that you want to get multiple casts off because they're beneficial to your entire team. In that case, you don't want them to get too stuck because they might just die instantly. Extra Renata reroll and specifics. So I'm going to talk about Renata for a second. So let's get some sentinels here. So we're coming to the end of this video, but I'm just going to start explaining some specific scenarios of specific units and their positioning. So with Renata reroll, a lot of times you see people position either like this, like let's say you have a Singe 3, right? A lot of times you see them solo frontline the Singed and then clump everybody like this kind of towards the middle. Why is that? The reason that you see either this positioning or triangle or like U-shape is because Renata, if you read her ability, she has an effect that when she casts, if it goes through allies, it gives them a shield. So what you want to do is you want the enemy units. Let's say we have solo frontline Singed here, and let's just put some bruisers in. Good old bruisers on the enemy side of the board is always a fun thing to do for this tutorial. So let's say they have bruisers here. You want them to wrap around here because that way, or if you have like multiple front lines like this, you want them to kind of wrap around your units, because when Renata targets the tanks or targets the enemy units, her bullets are always going to pass through her allies, right? That's why you never really see Renata in the corner, because if you put Renata in the corner and you have a front line like this, she's not getting that much shield value because she's always going to be shielding these other units that may or may not be the main tanks. What you usually want is as she's deleting every unit off the board, you want her bullets to be passing through your carries, and that's why you usually just clump everybody towards the center of the board, because if you get like a position like this, for example, which happens quite often, you know, something like this where they have a really big front line and you have a very small front line, then every unit that you kill, you're going to be passing through one or multiple allies with her bullet, which gives shield, which is great. So that's like Renata specific positioning. Additionally, I talked about Quirky, but in general, scrap positioning, a lot of times you put your scrap units in the front line, so somebody like Powder and somebody like Quirky. Even though these are traditionally backline units, to make use of the scrap shield and to get off earlier casts, a lot of times you put them in the front line when you're playing scrap. Additionally, Black Rose. Let's go Black Rose. So with Black Rose units, a lot of times you're playing Black Rose with Garen. Typically, you put Sion on the edge of the board. Sion is better on the edge of the board because he's not a real unit, so you want to keep your other units alive more often than not. So if Sion takes damage, he charges earlier in the fight. So typically what you're going to do is you're going to position Sion in front of the enemy carry, right? Let's say, I don't know, let's find a Heimerdinger again. This is like my go-to, right? You position such like this because Heimer will target the Sion will pop out and then he'll dash, and sometimes he ends up stunning the enemy carry. I can't put it because of the way it works on the website, but he'll dash through, and then as he dashes, he stuns, which sometimes can hit the backline carry. So typically you position like this. You usually put Garen to give HP to the Sion because you just want him to live a long time so he gets the stun off. But this is typically how you position with Black Rose. Sometimes you'll see people put Sion in the middle. Typically when you put Sion in the middle, just because like your Sion, you really want him to live a little bit longer. Maybe you're only playing 3 Black Rose, so you want the stun off. You want the stun to go off a little bit later in the fight. It's just like a timing thing. It's not super beneficial either way, so I wouldn't recommend it all the time. It's just a feels bad sometimes when Sion dies before he gets like good value. But typically you're putting him on the edge of the board just so that your units are a little bit safer, and then he just stuns the back line. But obviously you can position him in such a way that he gets it when he gets a stun off, he stuns the enemy carry, right? If you're playing against a Renata, for example, you want to put the Sion in the middle so he gets the Renata instead of getting your other units. Besides that, I can't really think of any other units in positioning, right? I think the same positioning applies to like everybody else. There is some other situations like lose streak positioning. So when you're lose streaking, I already talked about it in general, but this is just something that's like a very niche situation. Sometimes when you're lose streaking, it helps if you have to hold on to a unit to trap them, right? So this is an example of trapping your unit. If you put 2 ranged units in this corner, what happens is these ranged units won't move because they're gonna have enough range to hit the enemy front line, right? So what you can do is you can trap melee users or frontline units in the corner here because they won't be able to walk. It doesn't work on this side, obviously, because on this side they just walk out this way or they walk out this way. But this is a good idea to do, especially with Chem Baron. This is a trick that you can do because with Chem Baron you can't sell your units. You have to hold on to them. So if you have to hold on to a unit and you have like a really expensive unit like a Rennie that usually can sway a fight and somebody's trying to outsack you, this is a way that you can position such that you guarantee lose a round. If you're playing against this, you just want to put all your units really far away if you're trying to counter this setup, because as soon as these units have to walk up, then it eliminates the purpose of it, right? Additionally, if you're not doing that, you can also put your units in the front line just to make sure that they die. I think that's it. We kind of went through everything, hopefully, or as much as possible. Thanks for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe if you do like my content, and hopefully that was enjoyable. Somebody asked me to talk about positioning. I tried my best to explain it as thoroughly as possible. It's going to be a long and maybe boring video, so hopefully I tried to make it as entertaining as possible with the intonation of my voice, the best that I can. But yes, make sure to like and subscribe if you liked that video. Hopefully it was helpful. Hopefully it gave you some insight. A lot of this feels very like, you know, if you play a lot of the game, a lot of this thing comes secondhand. So it's more for beginners, if anything. But hopefully it was somewhat like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And these are some tips and tricks I can use that kind of help me out, whoever was watching this. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.